You have been misled for most of your life, but maybe not in the way you think. No one really told you that attraction is not always something people plainly see. More often, it is something they sense. No one told you that the strongest presence in a room is often the one saying the least. And no one told you that while you sat there doubting yourself, someone somewhere may have been quietly trying to understand why they still cannot stop thinking about you. You have probably imagined attraction as obvious praise, direct attention, and clear desire that walks up and introduces itself. But what if it usually looks nothing like that? What if it looks like silence instead? Like someone losing their train of thought in front of you? Like eyes meeting yours across a room and then quickly turning away? Like people acting a little strange around you for reasons they could never explain if you asked them? Stay with this, because this changes everything. What if the reason you have felt unseen for so long is simply that you have been searching for the wrong signs? Real impact does not always arrive with noise. It lingers, it disturbs, it stays alive in people's minds after you are gone. And one of the biggest illusions you have carried is the belief that if something is not obvious, then it is not real. But that is not how people work. That is not how attention works. That is not how presence works. Tonight, you are not going to see yourself through your own old doubt. You are going to see yourself through the quiet reactions you may have been missing your whole life. And once you notice them, it becomes very hard to go back. There is a quiet habit inside the mind that makes us treat our self-image like truth. We act as if the way we see ourselves is objective, like a clean mirror. But it is rarely clean. It is marked by memory, by fear, by old pain, by the weight of other people's opinions collecting year after year. A lot of what you believe about your own attractiveness may not even be yours. It may have been shaped by the projections of people who never saw you clearly in the first place. That is where the confusion begins. People do not meet you and respond only to who you are. They meet you and respond through who they are. They look at you through their own insecurity, their own unspoken desire, their own unfinished pain. If someone feels deeply lacking inside themselves, they may reduce what they allow themselves to see in you, because seeing you clearly might force them to face what they feel they do not have. So their reaction to you is not a clean measurement of your worth. It is often a defense against their own discomfort. But because you are the one receiving that reaction, it is easy to absorb it and call it truth. Over time, these little distortions start to pile up. A cold comment here, a moment of being ignored there, the strange absence of the validation you thought would prove your value. Each one plants doubt. Quiet doubt, lasting doubt. And because the mind rarely goes back to question where that doubt began, it simply builds on top of it. So listen closely. The next time you think someone's response defines you, remember this. People are not neutral. They are carrying storms. And many times what looks like your rejection is just their inner conflict meeting your presence. There is a strange paradox here that most people never notice. The more deeply attractive a person is, not just in looks but in presence, energy and realness, the more likely they are to trigger projected reactions in others. Because true attractiveness stirs something. It does not only create admiration, it can also create comparison. It can make people curious, but it can also make them uneasy. Not everyone has the self-awareness to understand what is being activated inside them when they are around someone who feels quietly powerful. So some people pull back, some criticize, some act like they noticed nothing at all. And every one of these reactions can be mistaken for indifference when the truth is often the opposite. Their system registered something important. They just did not know how to handle it. This is where people get lost, because projection almost never arrives in a clear way. No one walks up and says, "Your presence is making me question myself." No one says, "I feel pulled toward you and that makes me uncomfortable." Instead, it leaks out sideways, through mixed signals, through random distance, through criticism that seems to appear for no good reason. And because these signals are blurry, you are left alone to interpret them. Most people interpret them against themselves. That is how a false self-image hardens. You decide that if admiration is not spoken, it must not exist. You decide that silence means absence. You decide that confusion in others must mean something is wrong with you. But human perception is far more messy than that. People are not calmly observing you and giving pure, accurate feedback. They are reacting through their own inner weather every second. And if you miss this point, you will keep reading your worth through eyes that were never clear enough to see you honestly in the first place. There is also something even simpler, and it matters more than people think. You live with yourself every day. You see your own face, your own habits, your own flaws so often that they start to feel ordinary. What has become normal to you may feel rare to someone else, but you have no way to step outside your own experience and look at yourself from the outside. You cannot see what it feels like to encounter you without your history, your memories, your self-criticism attached. Other people do. They meet you as something external, something fresh, something they have not fully figured out yet. That alone creates a gap between how you see yourself and how you are actually being felt. So the real shift is not about trying harder to become attractive in some measurable way. It is about understanding that the picture you hold of yourself may be deeply incomplete, maybe even wrong. That changes how you move. You stop treating every outside reaction like a final judgment. You stop letting silence, inconsistency, or awkwardness become evidence against your value. You become steadier, less reactive, more observant. And then something interesting happens. You start seeing patterns you once missed. You realize attention does not always look like praise. You notice that admiration often hides beneath hesitation, fear, and inner conflict in the person feeling it. That is where real confidence begins to grow, not the kind that feeds on constant approval, a quieter kind, a stronger kind, the kind built on understanding. You start to see that many of the ideas you had about yourself were borrowed from people who were never truly able to see you. And once that lands, the old image starts to crack, slowly, then all at once, and in its place, something more honest appears, not louder, just truer. And if you are still listening, this is where the picture starts getting very clear. There is a language below speech that tells the truth before words ever get there. It is subtle, it is easy to miss. But when attraction is real, this hidden language often says far more than anything spoken out loud. The strongest feelings rarely show up as polished confessions. They leak through behavior, through tiny actions the conscious mind does not fully control. Eye contact is one of the clearest examples. When someone holds your gaze just a second longer than needed, there is meaning in that extra second. Attention is selective. People do not rest their focus on something without a reason somewhere beneath awareness. But because the moment is brief, because no explanation comes attached to it, you may brush it off as nothing. Do not rush past that so quickly. When it happens again and again, it is no longer random. It starts to suggest curiosity, interest, even admiration that has not yet found the courage to become direct. And along with that, there is often hesitation. Attraction makes people vulnerable. To notice someone deeply is to lose balance for a moment. Not everyone is comfortable with that. So they look, then look away. They seem fully present one moment and distant the next. That inconsistency is not always confusion. Sometimes it is a tug of war between desire and self-protection. Here is the part most people get wrong. They assume awkwardness means dislike, but very often awkwardness means the moment matters. If someone feels nothing, they stay casual, loose, careless even. But when someone fidgets, stumbles over words, shifts in their seat, or suddenly becomes too aware of themselves, something has changed inside them. And before you dismiss that as meaningless, keep watching, because the small signals are where the real story begins. Nervous energy is one of the most misunderstood signs in human interaction. Someone may adjust their posture too much. Their words may stop flowing. They may laugh a little too hard or explain something far too long. Your first instinct may be to assume they are uncomfortable in a bad way, or worse, that they are simply not interested. But many times the reverse is true. When a person is indifferent, they usually stay relaxed. They do not care enough to become overly aware of themselves. Nervousness means the moment carries weight. It means they are suddenly conscious of how they sound, how they appear, how the interaction is landing. That shift does not happen for no reason. Your presence has interrupted their normal rhythm. It has made them more alert, more careful, more exposed. That is not nothing. There are also people who unconsciously try to keep the moment alive. They stretch a simple conversation past its natural end. They repeat a point that did not need repeating. They overdo the humor. They add one more question even when the exchange should already be over. These are not always clever moves. Often they are clumsy, but they come from a simple desire to stay near you a little longer. And because these efforts are awkward, people miss them, or they misread them. Then there is mirroring, one of the quietest signs of all. People who feel drawn to you may start copying small pieces of you without noticing. Your tone, your smile, your pace, your stillness. If you are calm, they calm down. If you lean in, they lean in. The mind does this automatically when it wants closeness. A single glance or one nervous moment can mean very little on its own, but repeated patterns across different moments tell a very different story. And this is your retention line right here, because the next part explains why the strongest signs are usually the ones nobody says out loud. The deeper truth is that attraction often shows itself through what people cannot fully hide. It lives in pauses, in broken eye contact, in posture changes that happen the second you come near, in the tiny edits people make to themselves when they feel seen by someone who matters to them. But you will miss all of it if you are waiting only for the obvious. Human behavior is rarely that clean. People hesitate, they guard themselves. They hold back because rejection feels risky and being wrong feels embarrassing. So their real response comes out in pieces, not declarations. And that same principle exists on a bigger level too. Some people carry a presence that goes beyond looks, beyond words, beyond anything easy to measure. It enters a room before they say a single thing and stays behind after they leave. Most people do not realize this kind of influence exists because they think impact has to be loud to be real. It does not. In fact, the strongest shifts are usually the quietest. You walk into a space and something changes. A conversation slows for a second. Attention redirects. The mood adjusts just a little. Nobody announces it. Nobody stops and says the room just shifted. The change folds itself into the atmosphere and disappears back into the flow. That is why you often do not notice it. You are inside the moment, not outside watching it. You have no way of comparing what the room felt like before you arrived, so you assume nothing happened. But that assumption is often wrong. Some people do not need to perform to be felt. Their presence is enough. It does not demand attention, and somehow it receives attention anyway. If that sounds impossible, keep listening. Because once you understand how silent impact works, a lot of your past starts making more sense. If you are not actively trying to stand out, it may feel unlikely that you are affecting anyone at all. But that is often where the most genuine kind of magnetism lives. Presence that does not beg to be noticed has a kind of honesty to it. It feels natural, unforced. And because it is unforced, people respond to it in subtle ways. Someone starts sitting straighter. Someone looks your way more than once without realizing it. Someone becomes slightly more careful with their words. The whole room may feel a little sharper, a little more awake, and no one can quite explain why. These reactions are not planned. That is why they are easy for you to miss. Sometimes what people feel around you is contrast. In a place where everything feels predictable, you bring something different. Maybe it is the way you observe before you react. Maybe it is how calm you stay when others would become loud or scattered. Maybe it is your self-control. Maybe it is your stillness. Whatever it is, that difference creates tension, quiet tension, the kind that makes people notice without knowing what they noticed. There is also an emotional side to presence that people rarely talk about. Being felt is not the same as being seen. Some people carry a depth, a stillness, an intensity that changes the emotional tone of the space around them. When you have that quality, people may find themselves more aware of who they are in your presence. Some are drawn to that, others are unsettled by it, but both are reactions, both mean something landed. And yet because these reactions happen below the visible surface, you may keep telling yourself that you do not leave much of an impression. That belief can survive for years, but it survives only because so much of what is real between human beings is never openly expressed. That is why the next part matters so much. One of the biggest misunderstandings people carry is the idea that being underestimated means they are lacking something. But that is not always true. In many cases, it points to the opposite. When people cannot quickly place you into a simple category, they often reduce you instead. Not because you are simple, but because reducing you feels easier than sitting with complexity they cannot immediately read. The mind likes shortcuts. It likes labels. It wants to decide quickly and move on. But when a person has real depth or quiet magnetism, they interrupt that process. You may not reveal yourself all at once. Your thoughts may not be obvious right away. Your emotional world may not be easy to decode, so people grab the easiest explanation they can find. They call your quietness disinterest. They call your calm coldness. They call your independence emotional distance. These are not deep insights, they are convenient guesses. They allow others to feel as if they understand you when they have really seen only a fraction of what is there. The same thing happens with being underestimated. If you do not constantly advertise your strengths, people may assume there is less beneath the surface than there actually is, not because you lack substance, but because you do not feel the need to prove yourself every minute. In a world that often confuses visibility with value, quiet strength gets overlooked all the time. But there is freedom inside that too. When people have not fully expected you, you move without the heavy pressure of their assumptions. You are not trapped inside a role they built for you too early. That kind of freedom is rare, and if you have lived it, you know it can feel lonely too. But lonely does not mean empty. Unclear does not mean unseen. And misunderstood does not mean unworthy. Being misunderstood can create a painful kind of isolation. There are moments when it feels like people are interacting with a smaller, flatter version of you, not the full person you know exists inside. That feeling can feed self-doubt fast. You start asking yourself whether you are being ignored, whether you matter less than you thought, whether maybe people just do not see anything special in you at all. But being overlooked and being misunderstood are not the same thing. Being overlooked suggests there is nothing there to notice. Being misunderstood often means there is more there than people can process quickly. That is a very different reality. There is also a hidden link between being difficult to read and creating fascination in others. When something resists instant clarity, the mind keeps returning to it. People circle back. They think about the interaction later. They replay your tone, your expression, your energy, trying to understand what they felt. Most never say this out loud. Many are not even fully aware they are doing it. But the effect is real. Some people remember you longer precisely because they did not fully understand you in the moment. You stayed open inside their mind. You became a question they kept turning over. And here is something worth holding on to. Not every person who is drawn to you will move closer. Some will freeze, some will pull away, some will become strangely formal, some will criticize what they actually feel affected by. This does not mean you imagined your impact. It means human beings are complicated, defensive, and often disconnected from their own inner truth. So if you have spent years assuming that a lack of clear expression means a lack of effect, maybe it is time to drop that story. Because the signs were never absent, they were quiet. And quiet things are easy to miss when you have been trained to believe only loud things count. So what changes when you truly understand all of this? You stop chasing proof in the most obvious places. You stop needing every signal to come in a form that leaves zero doubt. You become better at reading patterns instead of moments. Better at noticing repetition instead of waiting for performance. You start seeing how often people glance, adjust, hesitate, return, and remember. You notice how many reactions are indirect, how much attention comes wrapped in awkwardness, how much admiration arrives mixed with fear. This does not turn you into someone arrogant. If anything, it makes you calmer, more grounded, less hungry for constant reassurance, because you begin to understand that your value does not rise and fall based on whether people know how to show what they feel. Some do not, some cannot. Some are too defended, too insecure, too confused by their own reaction to express it cleanly. That has always been true. And once you see it, the world starts looking different. Conversations make more sense. Strange moments make more sense. The silence you once took personally starts to feel less final. You no longer read every mixed signal as a rejection of you. Sometimes it is just evidence that your presence touched something deeper than the other person knew how to handle. Let that sink in, because this is where the old script ends and a better one begins. You were not necessarily invisible. You were often just being felt in ways that did not announce themselves. You were not always ignored. You were sometimes being processed. You were not always too little. You may have simply been more powerful, more memorable, and more affecting than you had ever been taught to believe. And if this is landing for you, then you already know the next time you walk into a room, you may not see everything that shifts, but that does not mean nothing shifts at all.